Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. We are on podcast number 2 of a short podcast series we're doing on developing the Copilot process for each of the Myers-Briggs personality types. Now, if you're unfamiliar with that, my recommendation is you go check out the podcast we just recently did on the CAR model and then also on the resistances we have to developing our Copilot. We're not going to spend a lot of time establishing what that means. What we're really talking about is each personality type has a series of cognitive functions or mental processes that they favor, which is the building block for the personality type. And we have a tendency to gravitate towards what is called a dominant cognitive function, or we in our CAR model call it a driver. And we have a tendency to marginalize or not develop as much that Copilot or auxiliary process. And one of the reasons why is because it lives in the world that we are not as comfortable in. That is to say, if our driver or dominant process is introverted or extroverted, our Copilot process is going to be the opposite attitude. And so therefore, it's in the world that we don't favor. We don't like that world as much. And so we have a tendency to maybe develop it only when we rely on it for problem solving, or we develop one or two aspects of it instead of the full fleshed out experience that Copilot can afford us. And so when we talk about this, and we're on about this all the time on the podcast, develop your Copilot process. One of the number one questions we get is, how do we do that? Well, there are a couple different resources we've created on the website. We've got some articles around developing each of these cognitive functions as a Copilot. We have a book we've written that talks a bit about this, and also our premium content oftentimes does a deep dive. But for those of you who are just podcast listeners, we wanted to give you at least a little bit of context around what this can look like, and maybe one or two exercises that will help you move the needle on developing your Copilot process.
So today we've decided to take the intuitive function. There's going to be an extroverted intuitive function and an introverted intuitive function that we want to talk about today at the Copilot level. So for all INPs in the Myers-Briggs system, or all ENJs, you will have at your Copilot position either extroverted intuition, if you're an INP, or introverted intuition for ENJs. Now, intuition, again, is a perceiving process. Remember, we talked about this in the CAR model podcast. This is how you take in information. You perceive your world using your imagination, using advanced pattern recognition. It's not necessarily based on your senses. You are taking information using your senses, but you're putting stories to that. You're making meaning out of those inputs, and you're guessing and speculating about what could be happening, maybe behind the curtain, what could be happening down a long timeline, what could be happening with things you can't prove or know as facts. You're using this advanced pattern recognition imagination to make connections between things that may not be connected, or to see patterns over time or in other people's minds or perspectives. So this is where we're going to focus today.
If you want a deeper dive into both extroverted intuition and introverted intuition, we've done podcasts that fillet out the concept, and I recommend going and checking those out if you haven't, to get like a really fleshed out view on how each of these functions operates. But we're going to talk about some of the resistances that INPs and ENJs have toward developing their Copilot, and some of the ways that you can get past that resistance and actually really make it a tool, a really substantial tool in your toolbox.
Now, because this perceiving process, if you're an INP or an ENJ, is your Copilot, that means you come to the world leading with what's technically called a judging function, a decision-making function. So as you enter the world and you move through the world, you're going to have a proclivity to be more decisive, or at least know how you feel about something, the should statement in your life, more than be open to. Now, this is a general overview, right? Not everybody feels this way, but being more decisive in the world, or understanding how you feel or think about something, is going to be more accessible to you than just opening yourself to what you perceive around you. So a lot of what we're talking about in this podcast from a principled level is going to be opening up your perception, opening up yourself to taking in more information, taking in more speculation, and using that intuitive process to round out that decision-making function that you lead with as either an INP or an ENJ.
As we mentioned in the previous podcast, there are some challenges that let's start with INPs.
Yeah, let's do
shall
it.
we? Okay, I'm just going to jump right in. There are some challenges that INPs have around developing their Copilot process because it does require them to go seek information that broadens their horizons, so to speak. They must take in more territory. And INPs all lead with either introverted feeling if you're an INFP or introverted thinking as an INTP. And if you're leading with introverted feeling, or what we also call authenticity, it takes a long time. Even though you lead with a decision-making function, it can take a long time to determine what the right decision is, because you have to go in and consult your identity. Most of the decisions are made on an identity level. And that takes a long time to figure out, right? There's like a lot in there to identity and conscience and figuring out what's right for you and what feels right for you. For INTPs that are using introverted thinking, or what we call accuracy, it also can take a long time to go in and look for what's the good data and the bad data that has been programmed into them since childhood to try to determine the truthfulness of something, or at least its accuracy. And then to determine what is integrity with the good data, or what makes sense to the user. And so since these processes can be slow, methodical, very process-oriented, then taking in new information now means having to question some of the assertions that came from your original review. Like if you think you know yourself really well and you get put into a new circumstance or situation that now makes you question what you thought you knew, now you have to do a bunch of work. You have to go in and shift your identity and shift your principles and shift your conscience and sense of integrity, because new information helps you figure out more about yourself. So INPs have a tendency to resist it because it represents a lot of work. Actually, developing the Copilot represents a lot of work for all the types, but that's the specific way in which it represents for them. So extroverted intuition then can be something that they use when they have to problem solve, right? It helps them be creative in problem solving and see new patterns. And maybe it's fun, like a fun mental exercise to ask what if questions and do some research. But the real gifts of extroverted intuition, or what we call exploration, come from exploring. That's where the real gifts of this process or function come from. Getting into the outside world, getting out of your comfort zone, getting into new experiences that are radically different than what you have ever experienced before. Travel, practicing being happy, practicing being optimistic, looking at life through a more idealistic frame if you're an INTP, or even sometimes a more practical frame if you're an INFP. Both of those things can be gifts of getting out into the real world.
I think one of the things that happens here for INPs is this process of exploration takes a metric ton of energy to be able to use. And I think one of the things that you as an INP, when you have introverted thinking or introverted feeling, you kind of know how you feel about things or how you think about things. And because you love continuing down the road of feeling or thinking the way you're feeling or thinking, going into this process feels like, man, I would have to generate incredible amounts of energy to sustain being able to explore to the degree you guys are suggesting, you know? And this is something, again, this isn't something that's so out of your framework you don't have a relationship with this process. Obviously, you probably have elements of you that enjoy exploring. You probably have niche places in your life that you enjoy exploring and opening up yourself to. But when it starts to get a little bit tougher, or maybe you have to see aspects of yourself, you don't really want to go to those areas. And so I would just say that one of the things that when you're getting ready to pivot to this process or put some focus on this exploration process, one of the things you will need to generate is you got to find ways to generate a lot of energy, because the exploration process, out of all of the cognitive functions, burns the most resource. It is the least efficient process of all of them. Sometimes it takes a while to ramp up into it. And then once you're there, it is very inefficient because you're making connections and you're exploring things that you don't really have a pathway for. There's no pre-done template here. If you're doing it right, again, this is principled level stuff I'm talking about on the abstract. If you're doing it right, there's not going to be a pre-done path. That's the point, is you don't want to follow a pre-done path for you. You want to go and explore things and make connections between experiences that may not be seemingly connected already. And this can burn a lot of energy. And so one of the things that I see a lot of resistance to is just the sheer amount of energy that this will take to enter into this in a practiced level. You're going to go there, you're going to default here in ways, but that energy is going to be required for you to do it well, I think, if you're exercising it.
Yeah, and the other thing is that extroverted intuition or exploration, it does a lot of stupid stuff. Not stupid as in like idiotic, but
false starts.
Yeah, lots of false starts, a lot of things that other people question, like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. Because it's not a rational function. It's not something that makes sense. It's something that's it's test iterating, it's trying all sorts of new stuff, it throws spaghetti against the wall. And so another piece that an INP has to make peace with as they're developing this function is the image management hit that they might take. You can't do a lot of image management and be in this function. This function does not allow you to image manage. Like, you got to be willing to do things that look crazy to the outside world sometimes. Things that don't seem to make any sense at all.
Unstable would be the word that a lot of people would probably apply to you if you're here. If you're living here and exercising this, you're unstable. You can't be relied upon. It's unreliable and unstable to people.
Yeah, and we know this as ENPs because we get this moniker a lot. People look at us and they're like, why are you making the choices you are? And it's hard to explain why. It's because we're following new paths and blazing new trails, and that's what extroverted intuition is designed to do. And so part of what you have to let go of is this idea of image management. You're going to take credibility hits. And at the same time, while all that sounds terrible, you have to, it's an energy inefficient function, and you take credibility hits and other people will see you as, being crazy or unstable at times. One of the gifts it gives you is optimism. It gives you, because it's so focused on what if questions and what could be, it's one of the, if not the most optimistic function of the 8. And so there's a lot of joy to be had in this function. There's a lot of joie de vivre that comes along with it. A sense of freedom oftentimes comes along with it. And so once you get past the self-consciousness of using the function, which happens, you will burn it out of you. I promise you. As an ENP, I promise you'll burn it out. And once you burn the self-consciousness out, once you're really doing this, on the other side is a sense of extraordinary freedom and a real sense of knowing oneself. Having been through a lot of different contexts and situations that test your mettle, that make you reevaluate what you thought you knew about yourself. On the other side, it's not just a suspicion that you know who you are with some insecurity attached, like, well, maybe I don't, but I'm just going to convince myself I do. On the other side, you truly do. You actually know who you are in all of these different contexts, and then you can pattern recognize who you'll be in even more situations that are new for you and novel.
In our INTX Unleashed program, we interviewed 3 INTJs and 3 INTPs. Now, that was very interesting. Our friend Patricia was on that program. We interviewed her to talk about her being an INTP and some of the experiences that she had in growing her Copilot of exploration. And one of the things that over time in growing this, she spent some time working on it and developing it. She found a sense of, she called it bounciness, which is a very interesting term for an INTP to use. This notion of optimism, cheerfulness, and she said it was kind of a bouncy energy. It gave her a fun, engaged view of the world, and she was able to show up in contexts that were pretty stuffy in some ways. She runs an academic circle. She's a PhD. She has to go and meet with different business leaders or academic leaders, and those are some dry contexts sometimes if you end up in there. And she brings her extroverted intuition, her exploration function, to bring the bounciness, make connections. It actually, as an INTP, is one of the ways that she's been able to find connection with other people. So again, this is it's a way that she's been able to, as an INTP that was challenged with being able to find connection points with people, growing this exploration process has allowed her to have that the communion or the experience with others that she was so desperate to create that she didn't know how to. So that exploration process really helped her in that. So I'm giving you a vision for some of the outcomes that this can create in your life. If you're an INTP listening and you're like, this is a bunch of BS, I don't want to have to maybe go down that road. I really like how I show up to the world right now. What you guys are suggesting maybe doesn't make sense to me. If there's a craving for connection for you as an INTP, this is one of the ways that can be created in your life using this exploration process too.
And one of the challenges that INPs always have is that they want to be able to use or develop this function through research. They want to be able to sit at home, read books, do online research, and then develop their pattern recognition through it. And that will do a little bit of it. That will allow you to have a little hit of developing exploration, but we've talked about this concept of a snack versus a meal. It will give you a snack. It won't be a complete meal of extroverted intuition because you are able to censor the information that's coming in. If you read something you don't agree with, you can immediately reject it from your mind. But if you're in a real situation with information coming at you, and you're feeling the energy of it, and you're surrounded by maybe other people, and you're in a context where you can't deny what you are personally experiencing, then you have a much more difficult time censoring that information. It's very difficult to turn away from something that you are in the middle of as opposed to something that you are passively viewing.
I think this comes down to calibration and resonance. So if you're a INTP, you'll probably resonate with the idea of calibration. If you're an INFP, you might resonate with the idea of resonance, like something that resonates with you or feels authentic to you. And what ends up happening when you're doing that research online, because you're leading with a judging function, you come to the world, leading with decision-making of how something strikes you, either in your thoughts or in your feelings. What you tend to do is you will pre-calibrate the exploration you'll have. You try to say, well, I'm going to throttle and calibrate how my exploration process picks up information in the world. And that's what you're talking about, that online research is you're pre-calibrating. But what exploration does when it does things well is it post-calibrates. And one of the things that you'll need to do as an INP is you're going to need to speed up and move a lot faster. There's this idea of decision fatigue that you probably experience as an INP, where if you start to engage in that exploration process and you go out and you're like, okay, I'm going to go up and maybe be bold in something or try something here. If you think about it too much and then you act, or maybe you don't act, you're still trying to pre-calibrate. You're getting into a decision fatigue. You almost have to turn off any decision and pre-decide just to act, explore, get messy, speed up the process, burn out the pre-calibration out of your brain by acting rapidly and moving from a rapid succession from one thing to the next to get as much exploration as possible. And once you do that, you blow past your brain's internal calibration mechanisms. You open yourself to post-calibration. Now, after you capture all of this experience, you can sort it out and find out what it means either in real time or later, but don't do it ahead of the time. Like, in other words, get into action first, speed up your processes, and move a lot faster. But again, going back to the energy management, it's going to require an immense amount of energy to do that. So make sure you're getting a lot of energy creation, and then speed up your processes so you're not pre-calibrating and not prejudging what you're doing. You're doing it first and then figuring out how you feel or think about it later. And this is a great way to do this process well. Again, from a principled level, we'll get into some maybe exercises in a moment here, but this is what's happening. You want to post-calibrate, not pre-calibrate.
Yeah, and that post-calibration can happen in your 10-year-old or tertiary function of introverted sensing, or what we call memory. Memory, when anybody's using the memory process, what they're doing is they're going back and reviewing something that they have already experienced and then making connections about what they experienced. They're having their little, extroverted intuition ahas while they're going back and reviewing it. When you're doing something like online research, what you're doing is you're collecting data in your memory process and then hoping to do enough post-processing with the information you collected to be able to have those extroverted intuition connections in a more passive way. But that's that's basically using memory as your guiding data gathering, mechanism, and then hoping a little bit of exploration will come in and help you out. But that's the opposite frame you want to come from. You want to lead with exploration and get those real world experiences, and then later on use introverted sensing or memory as a tool in exploration's behalf. So it's really important that you remember that this is an extroverted process. That is its point. It's one of the reasons why you're resisting it, is because it's extroverted. Like, you would prefer to be introverted. You're an introvert. But extroversion means getting outside of yourself, getting into the outside real world. And energy is a big piece of that. It's not just feedback. It's not just content from the outside world. It is also energy that comes from the outside world, and energy in engaging with people, and energy engaging in environments, and energy engaged in basically basically the entire world is filled with energy, which you as an introvert are attempting to avoid a lot of times because it can be overwhelming, but that's what you have to head toward. And in particular, uncomfortable situations. Now, this is going to change from person to person. What is uncomfortable to you as an INP is going to be different to another INP. You might have really nailed the relationship piece, but it's business and finances that are really uncomfortable for you. Or you might have no problem with ambition and you might be building something that you feel really proud of, but it's the relationship piece that really messes you up. It might be your relationship to power, or it might be your relationship to value. It might be your relationship to who you are and your self-esteem. Whatever it is that you find yourself sort of churning inside around, that's what you need to head towards. And discomfort will be a guiding light. Now, what's nice about extroverted intuition or the exploration process is that over time, what is uncomfortable becomes comfortable. So that is, when you throw yourself in these uncomfortable situations over and over again, eventually you'll find yourself far less awkward in those moments. Being out of your comfort zone will become your new comfort zone. And like Joel mentioned, in that way, you don't pre-calibrate, you don't hold yourself back or throttle yourself. You throw yourself into the situation and then post-calibrate, figure out afterwards. And that means that sometimes you're going to overdo it. That means that sometimes you're going to underdo it. You're going to have to try to, just through test, iterate, and through knowing yourself and understanding how you operate as an individual, you're going to have to throw yourself in these uncomfortable situations and then go, oh, I could have pushed myself further, or, oh, I majorly overdid it. Maybe I should throttle myself in this situation. But don't do it beforehand. Don't do pre-throttling, do post-throttling. And again, it's going to look weird to people on the outside, which is part of the reason why you haven't done it yet so far. Don't rely on image management. That is basically your enemy. Image management is your enemy as you're developing extroverted intuition.
So some techniques of this, when you're just getting started, going to some place where no one knows you can be helpful when you are using extroverted intuition, because there are some valuable ways in which we do have to preserve image. I mean, maybe you are, a faculty member at some university somewhere, and if you go out and start doing crazy things in your hometown or near the school you teach at or something, that may not look good onto the other faculty. So you might be figuring something out. Maybe you have to travel or put yourself in a different context to be able to practice some of this at first, especially when you're getting started. If you're brand new to developing this, it's going to throw you out of frame. You might have to find context where you feel safe in order to express this that won't destroy your life. And also, that might be something to think about too, that if getting into this process threatens the life you've built, you might want to pay attention to that. Maybe there's something there when you get more information. Maybe the life you've built isn't providing the opportunity for you to grow in the way that you need to grow. And so if there's a resistance because of the image management piece, you could practice maybe going somewhere else where the image breakdown isn't as painful because it's among strangers or something. And also, what does that mean about the life you've built? What does that mean about some of the exploration that you might do? It gives you light. It gives you insight into some of the things maybe that you need to change about your life. And when you come back and maybe start practicing back home, then you realize, wow, I don't have a space for this in my life. I don't have the people around me that would honor and support me doing this more. Maybe I need to make changes about who I am and how I show up to the world, because I really need more of this in my life, and this needs to be a really represented part of my skill set.
So we're going to give you one exercise to implement. And this one might sound weird. In fact, it is weird. But one of the things that you'll need when developing the exploration process is you're going to have to be happy. You're going to have to be joyful, because the joy and the optimism and the uplifted spirit is going to be a big piece of how you have the stamina and the sort of resolve to do what you need to do with extroverted intuition. So we're going to have you, if you choose to take this exercise on, our recommendation is that you practice getting out of bed and being happy, like immediately. So the recommendation is that you set an alarm for, in the middle of the day, by the way, maybe when you get home from work or on a weekend, you set your alarm for 1 minute. You lay down in bed as if you are get in bed for the night. You set the alarm for 1 minute, you wait for it to go off, and you practice jumping out of bed. And the first thing you do is you look up to the sky and put a big beaming smile on your face. You throw your shoulders back, you lift your head up, maybe even spread your arms out, and you just like breathe a big prayer of gratitude to the universe. Then you get back in bed and you do it again. You do it about 7 or 8 times. You set the alarm for about 30 seconds to 1 minute. It goes off. You jump out of bed. You put a big smile on your face. You throw your shoulders back. You lift your head. You spread your arms out, and you just put a big prayer of gratitude, a big thank you out to the universe. Or you can do it to God or whatever you choose to believe in on a deity level. But if you don't believe in any deity or God, then just say a prayer to the universe as a big gratitude thank you. The smile is really important. The smile will help you release all sorts of good, positive chemicals into your body. And you just keep doing it over and over. And I know that that sounds crazy, but if you do it enough times and you practice it enough times, it turns into muscle memory. And the next morning when you get out of bed, you'll jump out of bed and you'll have a big smile on your face. And you keep doing it. I say 7 or 8 times, but you could actually do it more. In fact, if you do it 20 times, you are more likely to have it be muscle memory for the next day. And you practice the art of being happy. And that's a big piece of extroverted intuition or exploration, is it's positive, optimistic, cheerful, bouncy, bubbly, happy tone that it gives the person who uses this function.
You can also take that and start to expand upon it once you do that first initial exercise. And you can practice it the same way. So you can take opening your arms, smiling, giving gratitude, and then going on to the next ritual of your day. Because what you're actually doing here is you're ritualizing something that puts you in a positive, optimistic framework and helps you generate energy to get into that exploration process. That's what you're doing. You're almost coming up and you're waking up and you're kicking off the day by getting into a framework of optimism, positivity, and it's setting you on a trajectory for the day of energy development, energy management, energy generation, and then going on. So you could build other things into that same routine. Because again, that ritual in the morning, you can anchor that into your 10-year-old memory process where you smile, you generate the energy. You might want to drink a full glass of water. You might want to go to the bathroom, whatever. Maybe you want to do something that kicks you off. Write down a couple ideas you've had, maybe from your dreams of the night before, some what-if questions. Maybe you have a journal prompt in the morning. Basically, customize this to yourself, but work on strategies to ritualize every morning. Using that memory process, you're doing the same thing every time you get up, and you practice it, like Antonia said, setting your alarm, getting up, giving that gratitude, smiling really big, looking up. Even our physiology, when we look up and smile, it triggers a bunch of brain chemicals to generate energy and generate positivity. And then you set your ritual to set you on a good trajectory of eating something healthy, drinking some water, movement toward that. So now you've generated the energy and you ritualize it. You start to do it every day. You develop that ritual and you can add to it, subtract to it, play with what it is. It's weird, right? That doesn't sound very exploration. It sounds very ritualistic, but that ritual then sets you off on the right trajectory for the day for all the exploration you're going to do going forward. So it's a really great exercise. And not just saying I'm going to do that in the morning, but like Antonia said, during the weekend, getting in bed and practicing, setting your alarm for 1 minute, running through your ritual. Like you could run through the ritual in like steps or sequences. You don't have to do every little activity in that ritual, but definitely do that opening of the arms, looking up to the sky, generating the energy, generating the positive framework and trajectory for the day. This is powerful for you.
Yeah, and it will calm down your 10-year-old memory process because that's usually what's hijacking you from being in the Copilot of exploration. So this positive, happy, optimistic, bouncy ritual calms down your 10-year-old and gives you the opportunity to be in your exploration process more. And what you'll do then is you'll find moments opportunistically throughout the day to engage in other exploration activities. Like one of the great ones is getting lost and finding your way back from wherever you got lost, or eating food you've never had before, talking to people you've never talked to before, whiteboard sessions, creative sessions where you're bouncing ideas off of other people. If you are in a positive frame of mind, if you're uplifted and happy and cheerful, then when these exploration activities or opportunities are available to you throughout the day, you won't be pushing away from them. You won't think, oh, I just don't have the energy, or I don't know what to say. You'll have the energy that you need in order to get into that exploration process. And I guarantee that you probably have never done what we're suggesting before. it's pretty unlikely that you listening as an INP have actually done this activity or exercise of jumping out of bed and smiling to your ceiling. So for you, this is brand new. This is something you've never done before, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for things you've never done before just to see how they'll pan out for you. And maybe it won't work, but at least you tried it. And that's the important thing with exploration.
So let's switch gears here. We've just talked about you INPs. You ENJs, we're coming for you next. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about ENJs. And at the Copilot position, your intuition is going to be inwardly focused. So this is introverted intuition. We've nicknamed it perspectives. Again, perspectives is a process that has spent so much time watching its own mind form patterns. Its imagination and timelines are internally focused. It watches how its mind follows almost like bloodhound trails of thought, and the thoughts bubble up. And sometimes if you lose the thought, it's hard to get it back because it's so tenuous inside your mind. And you've watched your mind bubble these thoughts up, and you've started to notice there's a pattern to how this happens for you. And because you've gotten this pattern down so much, you're starting to observe this over time as you grow up in other people. So often you are not only good at seeing the pattern in your own mind, but you're able to see patterns in other people's minds as well. And that's why we've nicknamed this perspectives. You're able to literally shift the perspective from what you can see and understand and experience into someone else's experience and get a pretty good sense intuitively of what's probably going on in the thought patterns of that other person.
But when it is a Copilot process for ENFJs and ENTJs, there oftentimes is a reliance on it for problem solving, but there's not a really filled out, fleshed out relationship with it like it would be if it was your driver process. So you might be using a truncated version of introverted intuition or perspectives and not even really realize it. Just kind of like all the types have a tendency to use a truncated version of their Copilot. They use it in very particular, specific ways, but they don't really want it to encroach on them. And for ENJs, one of the ways that perspectives encroaches on them is that it makes them slow down. It makes them really slow down. And to an ENJ, that can be really uncomfortable. They want things to be fast. They want it to be bullet points. They want to be able to get on to the next thing. They don't want to have to think too long about it. They want to be decisive and take action and make things, move and shake in the world. Whether that's on a financial track or a relationship track or whatever, they want to be able to impose order on the world of chaos. And when you go into the perspectives process, you're actually going into a process or a function that isn't orderly. It's very open. It's very free. It has a lot of chaos ascribed to it. It's the chaos of your mind. It's the freedom within. And there's not a lot of order that you can impose on the inner world that's simply looking for a trail to follow and to look for.
Now remember, as an ENJ, you're leading with a decision-making process again. So that decisiveness that Antonia's talking about, you want to close loops. You are looking to close loops, and this process is going to feel like it's going to get in the way. You're now taking in more information about how your mind is thinking about things. You're speculating more, and this is going to prevent you from the very thing that you have come to love, which is closing those loops, right? So you're not going to be able to act as fast, and it can be extremely frustrating to have to slow down and just see all the possible perspectives on something, when if you can push that out of your mind, those loops getting closed can happen so much faster. So that's why this is such a frustrating experience. And this is going to allow you, though, in our opinion, to close better loops. Because if you're just focused on closing loops, how do you know if these are the right loops? How do you know if this is the right to-do list? How do you know if these are the correct relationships to focus on or pour energy into? Unless you take the time to perspective and see what's actually going on inside your own mind and get into the perspectives of the people around you and how the decisions and the decisions you're making and the loops you're closing are impacting the world around you and the people around you.
For ENTJs who lead with extroverted thinking, or what we call effectiveness, and ENFJs that lead with extroverted feeling, or what we call harmony, both of these functions as your driver function are looking for weaknesses in systems. If you're leading with effectiveness, you're looking for the stress points in a system, and that includes the stress point in people. You're testing them to see where they'll break, and you're always looking for something that is a weakness, because then you can account for it when you're building structures and systems on your side. And then ENFJs are doing the same thing, even though that sounds really cold and calculating. You're actually looking for the stress points or weaknesses that people bring to relationships. What are they doing to create conflict, whether they know it or not? So your driver or dominant function of effectiveness or harmony are both looking for weaknesses in the outside world. You're looking for needs going unmet. You're looking for stress points. You're looking for what works and what's failing. And what perspectives does is it forces you to go inside your own mind and do that for yourself as well. Now, you might be using perspectives or introverted intuition to shift in perspectives to other people to find their weak points, right? That's part of it. That's part of the stress test. That's part of trying to figure out why somebody's creating conflict so that you can go get their need met in order to make it so that they're not, maybe projecting their pain outward, or that you can, fill in the gaps of their skills so that they're bringing their best self forward. And you might be using your Copilot of perspectives just to do that for others. But when you flesh out this process and truly do it well, you're now going inside your own mind to look for stress points. You're looking for the conflict you're bringing. You're looking for the weaknesses or the skills that you don't have in order to be a better version of yourself. And that means you have to slow way down. This is not a quick, fast, efficient process. This isn't something that you can game. It's not something that you can just figure out a speedy, bullet-pointed, or quick retreat. This is a process where you must truly sit with yourself, really look at how your own mind is set up. For people who use especially extroverted thinking or effectiveness, this can be super challenging. It can be challenging because the effectiveness process, when seen through like EEG machines, has a tendency to, once it makes a decision, very quickly create a mental superhighway, like a neurological superhighway, where all the neurons get together and just sort of set themselves, and then they don't have to review that decision or that conclusion they came to unless the world forces them to. And so this is why effectiveness is so effective, because it's super fast and it doesn't really question itself and it just gets going. But when you use perspectives, not just to get into other people's perspective, but actually to get inside your own and figure out which of those superhighways might not be serving you, now you've got a lot of work to do. Now you might have to unearth something that you've been relying on for a very long time, something that you just never thought you'd have to question again, something that makes you now less efficient. And that's why effectiveness is such an important word to remember. It's the long game. It's not just a moment of efficiency. Harmony can do the same thing, because with harmony, while it might not be creating these super highways super quick, it might be something that's a little more responsive. There's still a tendency to want to think that you've got everybody's best interest at heart. So your agenda is the most important. Yours is the one that you see everybody's perspective. So yours is the one that is actually helping, create this harmony. And so you might not want to question yourself, because if you question yourself, then you might find inside of yourself that maybe you don't have everybody's best interest at heart. Maybe there's something going on inside of you that actually is more about your own personal agenda, and that's very uncomfortable. It makes you question all of your talents. So perspectives is a very uncomfortable process sometimes, but even more so if you have ideas that have been deemed dangerous, if you have thought processes that come up for perspectives that are no-go zones, right? Like you're not even allowed to think that way, then you will be doing your own censoring. You will censor yourself when you go inside your own mind, because your mind will naturally gravitate towards places that are like the grid patterns on a map, right? Like if you ever play a video game and you're running around a video game, certain kinds of video games will have these maps that if you haven't gone to a portion of the map or the territory, then it will just look like grid patterns. And as soon as you go to that portion of the map, now it fills it out. And your mind is going to want to naturally go to places inside of yourself that are grid patterns. And you might have blocked those off intentionally, because there are thoughts inside of you that could be, you have decided, are dangerous. So you may be censoring your own perspectives process without realizing it, because the conclusions it could lead to might have really bad implications for your life. You might have to make major changes if you allow yourself to go there. And so just like with INPs that might be censoring their behavior, holding themselves back because they're afraid of the implications of doing something that might be damaging to their image. You might be censoring your own thought processes because it might be damaging to the life you set up. And the beliefs that you're holding and maintaining is very important. So people who are ENJs, one of the most difficult parts about perspectives is it means that there is dangerous ground within them that must be discovered.
Now, as an extrovert, as an ENJ, let's talk about energy for a minute. You're going to have more energy, most likely, than the INPs will have, just naturally. You're going to burn a little hotter in energy because you're used to getting things done, especially you're leading with that extroverted judging process of either extroverted feeling or extroverted thinking. You're active, you're closing loops, you're getting things done in the outer world. You're making relationships happen outside of yourself. And there's this notion of, for a lot of ENJs, this idea of monkey mind, where you have a lot of frenetic thoughts and actions, and there's a lot of energy just being generated through you to get all of these things accomplished and to orchestrate this world in the outer the outer world in a way that works or gets needs met. And what your job with energy, with the INPs, it's generating lots of energy to sustain that chaotic extroverted intuition. But for you, it's about harnessing and channeling that energy that you have, that energy that's coursing through you. If you sit still, and you just get quiet and you go inside your own mind, what do you do with all that energy that just keeps coursing through your body and through your psyche? You have to be able to harness that. You have to be able to, not suppress it, but control it and keep it contained, because it's going to want to blast outward in your thoughts or in your actions. So you have to be able to manage your energy, not necessarily generate energy. This is one of your challenge is going to be in that.
When you are in that still place, when you do bring your energy in and, not have it so dispersed, but more centered, some of the benefits that will come when you really center that energy and go inside and you don't censor yourself is that you're going to be able to use the perspective process to see the eventuality and long game of some of the things that you're doing in life. You'll be able to see longer timelines. You'll be able to ask questions like, to what end? And see the eventuality of the courses that you're on. It will also help you broaden the categories that you've applied to people. Some of the perspectiving that you may be doing right now are serving your own agendas, your own end games. You might have definitions in your mind like, you might have a very specific definition of what an A player is, or you might have a very specific definition of what a strong man or a good woman is, or a strong woman. You might have very, very narrow definitions that you have culled from quickly jumping into other people's perspectives, getting a little bit of data, and then coming back to your own mind. But when you are able to bring that energy in and you're able to really kind of sit with your thoughts and truly jump into others' perspectives and see a more fleshed out person, you're going to broaden your categories and you're going to see more 3 dimensions to other human beings. It will help you create more compassion. It will help you have better abilities to create that harmony that you desire, or maybe, talent scout and put people in the right positions. It's going to give you a lot more skill, and it really requires that ability to slow down.
So let's talk about a practical exercise you can do if introverted intuition is your co-pilot. What's something that you can do to develop this as an exercise? One recommendation we have, so the perspectives process is all about meaning making, finding meaning, narrative casting, or finding narratives in your own mind, basically, and making patterns inside your own mind. That's one of the things that perspectives does, or introverted intuition does very well. And in order to do that, you're going to have the time and the space to make that happen. So what we recommend you do is take out an hour a day, starting, and maybe you want to start a little smaller, maybe 30 minutes, but eventually an hour a day would be really great for this exercise. Block out an hour a day and choose a quote or something that you can riff off of meaning making with. Maybe a quote like Carl Sagan's, "We are the way to the universe to know itself." Let's just pull that quote out of the air for a second. And basically close your eyes, try to reduce sensory inputs, shut out the outside world. So you want to maybe go to a darker or quiet space so that you don't have a lot of sensory things coming at you, because your mind needs space to be quiet and just to allow thoughts to bubble up and patterns and meaning to be made. And ruminate on that quote and think about that quote and ruminate on it for an hour. Now, What's going to end up happening, most likely, if you're an ENJ, is your mind is going to ruminate on that for a few minutes, and then instantly your to-do list and your loops that are open are going to come into your mind of all the things you haven't gotten done today. I'm wasting time might be one of the things that comes up for you. Look at this. I'm spending an hour here. I could have knocked off these 5 items on my to-do list, and now I'm wasting time sitting in this darker room ruminating on a stupid quote. Like, this is ridiculous. And this is going to be something you're going to have to fight your own psychology around to say, wait a second, you'll have your place again, extroverted judging function of harmony or effectiveness. But right now, I'm allowing my mind to wander. I'm wandering the garden of my mind to find meaning and to make narrative out of this quote I'm meditating on. And you don't necessarily have to repeat it like a mantra. I'm not asking you to do that, but just sit with the quote. And every time you see your mind drift getting something done in the outside world or thinking about all the to-do items or all the people that need you right now, bring it back to the quote. Wait a minute. This is the moment I'm spending time thinking about this quote and the meaning it has in my life. And at the end of the hour, when the alarm goes off or that hour ends, take out a couple pieces of paper or a journal and just write down some of the insights. What was the meaning that your mind patterned? What was some of the meanings that bubbled to the surface after you ruminated on this quote for a while? What were some of the narratives that were cast in your own mind? Some of the ways that you think about that quote now based on your just meditating and sitting with that rumination. And then write that down, and you're going to start getting your mind into discipline of allowing it to wander its own garden, have meaning and thoughts and ideas and narratives bubble up, and then capturing those. And this is going to be, again, an exercise to develop that introverted, intuitive perspectives process.
This is going to be an excellent way for you to let go of self-censorship. When you ruminate, when you get to a place where you really teach yourself to ruminate and sit with an idea or a concept and allow it to bloom inside of you, right? Like Joel said, you're wandering the garden of your mind and you're allowing thoughts to blossom like flowers inside of you. As you do that, after you get past the initial thinking about all the stuff you're not doing and wanting to get back into an extroverted judging frame, once you graduate beyond that and give yourself full permission to just sit with your thoughts, the next thing you have to do is stop yourself from censoring where your mind wants to go. And that is, again, one of the challenges of really developing that Copilot process. It will be uncomfortable sometimes where your mind wants to go, and you will want to create boundaries for your brain to go, no, I'm not allowed to think about that. I'm not allowed to question a belief that's really important to me, or question a parent or an influential person in my life, or question my path. No, I'm not allowed to think about that. And over time, you will find yourself, if you give yourself incremental permission to wander those places, you'll find yourself more in control of your life, because a part of your life you may have outsourced to others. You may have outsourced your thoughts, your beliefs, your authenticity, your integrity to other people. And while you may feel in control of your life, if most of these things about who you truly are have been outsourced to others, then that control is a facade. And over time, you will find yourself on the other side, just like with the INPs having true self-confidence after having truly tested themselves in the outside world, you'll find yourself in true control over yourself in your life. And so the rewards are great. And then, just like with INPs and their exercise to get up and do something physical and do something they've never done before and get themselves into a space where they can, ritualize optimism, so that they can enter the world being opportunistically optimistic, right? Find opportunities for new, exciting things to do, like whiteboard sessions and travel and, novel experiences. Just like they will find themselves having more opportunities for extroverted intuition or exploration, you will also find yourself having more opportunities for perspectives throughout the day. You won't just make big leaps, big assumptions. You'll actually find yourself enjoying resting a moment and taking a couple minutes to really think about what's going on here and to really get inside somebody else's experience, to have compassion for them. And you'll use the extroverted sensing or sensation 10-year-old, the thing that wants you to get back up and get into action and get ahead of all the things that you got to do in the day. What you'll find your extroverted sensing doing is it will give you a bunch of information to kick up to introverted intuition or perspective so that you can really fillet out what's going on in a situation, that you're not making shallow speculations, that you're making deep ones by reading energies from others and reading energies from the outside world. But always make sure you're leading with perspectives. Sensation should be a servant to perspectives, not the other way around. Because if you make perspectives a servant to sensation, then you're only going to be able to predict things in very small increments of time. You won't be able to see those long timelines. You won't be able to really get inside somebody's mind and see something super three-dimensional. And so leading with perspectives and giving yourself concentrated time to do so makes it so that when you have other opportunities, you're already in that frame and you can have higher quality perspectives experiences, even if you're not by yourself at home alone in a quiet, dark room.
So again, from a principled level, if you're an INFP or an INTP, your Copilot is going to be extroverted intuition exploration. You're going to need to generate lots of energy. You need freedom of experience, and you're going to have to speed up in your life. If you're an ENFJ or an ENTJ, your Copilot process is introverted intuition. We've called it perspectives. You're going to have to slow down, harness your energy, sit with it. And your freedom is not of experience, but it's freedom of thought, being able to wander the garden of your mind wherever it takes you and be able to sit with thoughts that might be uncomfortable. So you can kind of see how these two intuitive processes, when you're developing them, show up on a principled level.
Now, the INPs might like the thing that ENJs need to do because that'll sound more native to you. It'll sound like it's fun. It'll sound like, oh, getting inside my mind, that sounds good. I want to do that. And vice versa. The ENJs will look at the exercise we gave to ENPs and you're like, yeah, that sounds like it could move the needle. That sounds like something I could practice and do. Yeah, getting up, feeling good, smiling at the ceiling, that sounds good. I want to do that. And that's how this works. Whenever you hear the recommendation for somebody who is working on something in your native world of introversion or extroversion, that always sounds way more fun. It always sounds way cooler. So if you're like, well, I want to do the other one, you certainly can. That's available to you. And also, you will not be developing your Copilot. And so you won't get the rewards of developing your Copilot. So this takes discipline and rigor, and it will definitely change your life if you're doing it right. Sometimes it changes your life in really uncomfortable ways. It changes your life in a way where you go, maybe the life I built is not the life I want. And that may be one of the reasons why you're avoiding doing this work. And if you don't avoid it, if you choose the perspective of the way out is through, if you get yourself to the other side and go through all of those arrows being shot at you and all that stuff being, all that artillery it feels like you're experiencing as you're developing your own native mental wiring. If you get to the other side, the changes you make will be more authentically you. They'll be more in integrity and alignment with who you are. They will be the thing that you want as your eventuality, as your end game. You'll be able to see way down the line and build the resource you want. They'll be able to create the relationships you want and create that true harmony and get through conflict. So it all sounds terrible when you initially hear it. Or maybe it doesn't sound terrible. Maybe it sounds fun, but you maybe, when you've been attempting to develop these processes in the past, maybe ran out of steam. But remember that the fruit at the end of all of this is well worth it.
Yeah, and I think that it's going to take some effort. It's going to take some time. We gave you some principled ideas here, and then we gave you an action step for each of these functions. But really, we need your advice as well. So we're on this hunt because we know that this is really important. We believe that the highest leverage avenue for growth for any individual, not just you if you're an INP or ENJ listening, but for all of us, is to grow our Copilot process. And so we talk about in principled levels, we gave a couple exercises, but application is something that is very unique and individuated. Am I saying that word right?
Individualized?
It's individual to you, I guess. I'll just say it that way. So what we need from you is some advice. As you test some of these things out as an INP or an ENJ, or maybe you've been working on developing your Copilot process based on recommendations you've heard us make before, come over to personalityhacker.com. Below this podcast, particularly about extrovert intuition or introvert intuition at the Copilot position, what are some things that you've done that have helped you move the needle? Because These are some ideas we have on it, but we're not INPs or ENJs. So what we say, again, isn't from direct experience. It's from coaching. It's from seeing this work in other people's lives. But you might have an experience in developing this that could be really helpful for someone else that's similar type of yours. Let's get a conversation going. We want to hear your story. How have you been developing this? What are some challenges or resistances that have come up when you're developing? What are some advice you could give to other people of the same type as you in order to develop this for them? What are things that worked? What are things that were failures? What are things that didn't work? We'd love to hear from you at personalityhacker.com. Your voice it's always important. And in this conversation, it's extremely important because you probably have insight into this that we simply just don't have. And it could be shared with the community at large. So come over, leave your story, leave your advice. Let us know how this has been working for you and some of the pain points and some of the success stories you've seen in developing your Copilot.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you want to know how to support Personality Hacker, one of the best ways to do that is to find out if one of our premium programs is right for you. It's not only a way for you to support us, but it's also a way to invest in your own personal development journey.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.